Right, so we're going to get rolling. Welcome everyone. Dementia and Inclusive Digital Design, an AbilityNet webinar with myself, Mark Walker, and Lily, who will introduce herself in a moment, who's an accessibility usability consultant. We're going to be running this for about 30 to 40 minutes. There's plenty of chance for questions. Please do ask questions as we go along, but there is actually time at the end for Q&A as well. So. I'm Mark Walker, the Head of Marketing Communications. Lily, can you tell us a bit about what your role is at AbilityNet and particular relation to accessibility?
Yeah, so as Mark said, I'm an accessibility and usability consultant, and that basically means I help a range of different clients to make their digital content accessible to all disabilities. And I have a background in working with young people and young adults and children with a range of different disabilities. So helping to create an inclusive digital world is something that I'm very passionate about. So I'm very happy we're doing this right now.
Thank you. I've also just been told that it's very, very blowy in Milton Keynes and that the weather's dreadful in Salford. So thanks, Kate and Rebecca, for that weather update. So what we're going to do today is talk about dementia. If you don't know about AbilityNet, we do lots of different technology stuff to help disabled people. We have a digital accessibility and testing service. We do workplace assessments. We have student assessments for those who are eligible for disabled student allowance. We have a network of IT volunteers who support people in their home. We have lots and lots of free resources on our website, one of which is My Computer My Way, which is a guide to all the accessibility features in every mainstream platform. We also run an event called Tech for Good Awards that's launching the week after next that celebrates people who use tech to make the world a better place. And we have a free helpline, and I encourage people to call this whatever the question is, really anybody with any sorts of questions relating to technology and disability. Give us a call on 0800 269 545. We have people ringing in about all sorts of different things, at home, at work, and in education. So, what is dementia? It's a group of related symptoms associated with the decline of the brain and its abilities. It's caused when the brain is damaged by diseases such as Alzheimer's or stroke. The particular symptoms depend on the parts of the brain that are damaged, and we're seeing a growth in the numbers of people who are being affected by dementia, and a large part of that has to do with the fact it usually affects people over the age of 65, and we have an ageing population, and therefore greater proportion of people in that age bracket, and therefore more people being affected. The current estimate is of about 800,000 people in the UK. On the dementia information I looked up on one of the websites suggested that will be over 1 million, relatively soon. It's a growing problem. So the question then, in terms of today's session, is really why would we design for dementia? I've got a big pound sign there, which is, there are many reasons. I mean, there are social reasons for trying to support and provide services to people who are living with dementia, and the people who help them and support them. But more particularly, there's the costs to society and to businesses of not thinking about this as a design issue. So as I said, the population is increasing, so there are more and more customers who may be using services, and we need to think about how to design those services for them. The internet and digital technology generally is a huge part of people's lives now in terms of communication and independent living, and so it's important that we think about all sorts of different users in terms of their needs when designing those services, shopping, banking, government services, for example. It's good for any business. This is part of our mantra, really, in terms of the work that we do. It's good for any business to consider every customer. We work with Barclays, Heathrow Airport, a whole range of different customers, and their work is really to reach every customer on every platform wherever possible, so that they're not leaving customers out. There is also a legal requirement for people to think about how they deliver services so that they're not discriminating against people. And that leads us really to the point that universal design is better design for everybody. It's not just about people with dementia, it's really about good design is good for everybody in all sorts of ways. So I'd like to, just at this moment, ask people to tell us a little bit about what is your interest in relation to dementia. I've got some questions I'm pulling up. If you can see the poll, if you're able to use the poll, please let us know what your interest is by ticking one of the boxes. You can tick more than one. We're obviously interested in talking to people who are designing and building digital services, but of course there are all sorts of other reasons why people may be interested in the webinar, and so it gives us an idea of the spread of interests. There is also an other box, and you'll see that you can leave any questions or use the question box, sorry, to add any extra particular points. If there's anything you really want us to try and address today, please let us know by using the other box. Great, so I can see that most people have filled that in now. If you can take a moment to just tick one of those boxes. We're seeing at the moment half the people here have said I'm a digital designer. About a third, maybe a few more now, have either they work with or support people with dementia or have personal experience of dementia. A smaller proportion are responsible for commissioning services for people with dementia. Great, so thank you everyone who's voted in that. I'm going to close that poll and then you'll be able to see the results. I'm just going to pop that up. You can see that 33% of people said they support people with dementia-related conditions. 48% said they're a digital designer. 15% said they're responsible for commissioning services for people with dementia, that should say. 36% say I have a personal experience of dementia. And a couple of other points that people have said are there's somebody who's researching, and there's someone who supports designers to create accessible and inclusive content, working with students, somebody's working with students. So a range of interests, which I think today's session should help you with, which is good news. We'll just hide the poll. So let's move on to symptoms, because this starts to lead into the design issues that we face as designers in accessibility. Three immediate issues which need to be addressed in terms of common symptoms of dementia is memory loss, people just having difficulty recalling events that have happened recently, particularly short-term memory. Concentration, planning or organising, people having difficulties making decisions, solving problems, carrying out a sequence of tasks, and issues with language in terms of understanding and judgment about decision making. And then a couple more, visual spatial skills, that's problems judging distances, for example on stairs and seeing objects in 3 dimensions. And then orientation, losing track of the day or date, becoming confused about where they are. So we've taken this as a starting point. These are sort of symptoms that are broadly sort of reflected across a range of conditions linked to dementia, such as Alzheimer's. And then, Lily, what we're going to be talking about today really is your take on the good practice for digital design. So looking at those symptoms and then seeing them as accessibility issues. So where do you start in terms of good practice for digital design? What sorts of starting points do you have? And then we can move on to the accessibility issues that they raise. I'm just going to switch over to you as the presenter so that you've got control over this. There you go.
Right, so let me just get the same slide up. We were here, right?
The next one.
This one, right. Okay, so from what Mark was saying about the common symptoms of people with dementia, I was thinking about how that can be applied to digital content. So some common digital accessibility issues that people with dementia may face in digital environments include problem solving with lack of descriptive instructions, poor color contrast, memory issues, understandability and readability of content, and general layout navigation and user interface. And this kind of gets us onto another poll we're going to run, which is about WCAG 2.0. I don't know if you want to do this poll, Mark.
It looks like I can't actually now that I've swapped over to you.
Right.
So
Do I swap back?
no, I think you should be able to do it in your control panel there.
Okay, let's see if I can.
At the bottom of the control panel, just do launch.
Yep.
That's it. There you go.
Okay, so WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Have you heard of it? I'll let people vote for that now. So the options are yes, I use it all the time, no, I don't know what it is, and sort of, can you remind me? So about half of you have used it all the time, which is great to hear. Just give it a few more seconds on that. Interestingly, the first time I read the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, I was like, wow, this is a whole bunch of jargon. So that's quite interesting as a first thing to read that. Okay, so Mark, do I just press close, right?
Close poll and then show results. I think the next
Close,
results.
share.
Yeah,
Does that
same
work?
way.
Okay, cool. So yeah, 51% of you use it all the time, 26% don't know what it is, and 23% sort of, can you remind me? So I'll quickly do a brief summary of what Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are. So this is on the web, everyone can have a look at them, and it's basically a set of guidelines describing how to make a website accessible. And back to what Mark was saying before about, you know, this is kind of a legal requirement, that follows these guidelines. So when you have some time, have a look through. And basically, I brought that up because these common digital accessibility issues I just mentioned do tie into the guidelines. So next, I'm going to be going through some good practice, about 14 examples of things you can apply to your websites, apps, in order to make a better experience for someone with dementia. So the first one we're going to cover is about the problem-solving and descriptive instructions issue mentioned earlier. So on screen on the slide, I have a screenshot from the Gov website, and in this, I'm talking specifically about forms. And so this is specifically for error recovery, basically. So often on forms, you see that some instructions in order to fix forms may just say, please select a value. And in the context of users with dementia, it's much more useful if you have really descriptive instructions specific to the form. So on this screenshot, we've got title and then a drop down where you could select Mr., Mrs., etc. And the error instruction here is you need to select your title from the drop down menu. And that is really specific, which is really great for this user group. And another one on screen is you've got first name as the form field, and then the error recovery message says you need to enter your first name. So again, that's really specific to the field, which is a really good technique for people with dementia. So following on from that, links must be easy to recognize so that users with dementia can locate and understand functionality of text. So basically, I've got a screenshot here from the Gov website again. It's a very good website actually for users with dementia. And, you know, we commonly know that with CSS, underlining text means you've got a link on screen. So using that as a clear indication of interactive elements is really useful. Sometimes you see on websites now there may just be a slight change in color indicating that it's an interactive element, whereas this, having the clear underline, is a really useful technique. So, next. The purpose of each link and button must be easily determined from the text alone. So this is referring to, say you've got a piece of content and then underneath you have a button or a link saying find out more. That's kind of following on from what I was saying earlier about the descriptive recovery error messages, so making it as specific as possible. So in this example here, I have a screenshot from the Barclays website, and you've got get your finances back on track, some static text about that, and then rather than having find out more button, the button actually says managing your money. So that way it's really specific to the context, and it helps the users with orientation and comprehension. It's a really good technique. A couple more on this screenshot are you have kickstart your career, a couple of lines of content about that, and then the button, rather than saying find out more, says life skills. So again, being specific to the context is a very good technique. Okay, so the next area of accessibility issues that I can recommend good techniques for is for memory. So useful features on a web page for individuals with dementia allow them to not rely on remembering what they have inputted. So for example here that we've got two screenshots. The first one is from BBC, and it's when you have a password field and you have the functionality to show or hide password. That fully enhances what I was saying about allowing the individual to not rely on their memory. That way they can look what they've inputted and not have to think, oh no, I can't remember what I've inputted, delete it, and then have to re-input it again, which could end up being a vicious cycle of stress, essentially. And that's what we want to decrease. We want to make it, you know, as easy as possible for the user. And then there's another screenshot here from Barclays, which is when you have a checkbox saying remember me. And it does say as well, we don't recommend this option if you're using a public or shared device. So that's also a useful function, so users don't have to remember their username and passwords when logging into whatever it is they're logging into on a site. So the next one is about navigation, predictability, and ease of use. So clear navigation helps people with dementia. This includes commonly recognized standard layouts such as easy to locate home links, search box, and site map in the footer. So I've got a screenshot from the NHS website, and this is something that is really good practice. Rather than having a home icon, this sometimes is seen as like a house on a page, actually having a home link, that way that text is always in the same location on your web page, and the user can always refer to the top left corner to go home if they're lost within a site. And that same concept applies to a search field, always having on the right-hand side. These are just common recognized standard layout design, but using that is very useful. And also the site map in the footer of a site as well. Okay, so the next point is about navigation steps on same page. So sometimes you may see forms or content that's split across several pages. So forms split across several steps is more effective when placed on one web page. This prevents people with dementia from feeling disorientated and allows them to scroll up and easily recall previous information inputted. So I've got a screenshot here from Barclays. Again, I know I'm using the same examples from the same places, but they're very good. So this one is really good. I like this. So you've got step 1 at the top with the form fields that you can input for that, and step 2 is on the same page, and they're accordions basically. So step 1 would open. When you finish that, step 2 opens, and then that way, say if the user's halfway through step 2 and they want to remember what they put in the first step of the form, they can just scroll up and it's there rather than having to navigate back, or they may not have remembered what was on the previous one. It's a really good technique, that. Okay, so next one regards timeout warnings. So it is important that users are warned if the page has timed out, and this must also include an option to remain on the page. This is kind of a general thing. What I'm about to say is that these techniques that I'm sharing for people with dementia are actually useful for all users, which is amazing. Going back to what Mark was saying earlier about universal design, if you create content with, you know, the needs of all your users in mind, then you're actually creating a better experience for everyone, which is amazing. I love that. So back to timeout warnings. So timeout warnings, you have to warn users of this via an overlay or a dialogue, whatever you choose, and you have to have the option to remain on the page as well. That way, rather than the user just being taken off the page and forgetting where they were, this is a much more useful and beneficial way to do that. So sometimes you may have a carousel with content on it. So following on from what I was previously saying, users must be able to access all content at their own speed, and this applies to WCAG in several of the success criteria. So components such as carousels must include a clear pause and play button. So this actually doesn't just help users with dementia, this could help users with dyslexia or literacy issues. So if you've got a carousel with lots of text on it, having that pause functionality so the user can sit there and read it at their own pace is very useful, and I think this is really, really good practice for all users. Okay, another point on navigation, breadcrumb links. So Clear breadcrumb links can be very useful for users with dementia. This allows them to see the path and navigation journey they went on. So this is a screenshot from a bank site, and it's got the navigation journey very clearly at the top of the page, saying the exact pages they went on to get to the current one. Very useful. I think breadcrumbs are very good. Color contrast. So, as said earlier, as dementia mostly affects older people, it's not uncommon for age-related eye degeneration to be present. So, it's important when choosing colors on a site with text and background to make sure that it passes color contrast checkers. So there's a couple of online resources actually which are really good that I recommend to people to use. There is WebAIM have a contrast checker where you basically can put in the color of your text, the foreground, and the color of the background, and it tells you instantly if this passes WCAG AA. And if it doesn't, then you have the functionality to lighten or darken either of the colors. So it does, which is great. And then another really good online resource is called Color Safe. And this is basically allows you to create a color palette, and it empowers designers, and it gives you a whole range of colors to choose from, and they're all going to be compliant with WCAG. Love that one. That's really good for the digital designers listening. Okay, use of font. So multiple fonts can cause distractions, so it's important for consistent font types to be applied on a page. And this allows the users to access the content a lot clearer and avoid distraction or disorientation if you've got multiple different font types going on at once. And also it's very good practice to highlight important text or pieces of information with bold or with color. And this allows users to focus on important information very easily. So I've got a screenshot here from the Gov website, and on this they've made text larger or bolder when it's important in keywords, and that's really useful. So, readability and language. Mark, did I just hear you say something?
No, it wasn't me.
Okay. So, readability and language. So, these are some kind of, again, what I was saying before, these sort of techniques will help everyone reading the content on your app or website. So use short text, headings, plain backgrounds, having a printable option. This is very useful for people with dementia. That way they can have that actual tangible item to read from, which is really good. So say if you have a bank site, and this includes lots of quite important information about a bank account, a current account, having that option to print that is going to be a really fantastic feature for these users. So using clear and direct language, avoid jargon, technical or specific language, scientific language, avoid abbreviations and acronyms. And so there's a resource here where you can do an online readability test of the content on your site. And this basically gives you a whole bunch of data, but it gives you the average reading age. And interestingly, the average reading age currently in the UK is 9. So again, if you make your content more readable and simpler for people with dementia, you're again making it better for everyone. So content again, when you have an image alongside content, it has to be relevant, and this can be really useful for users with dementia as it acts as a quick reference to the content on the page. So in this example here, it's from Heathrow, and it's a page about private hire minicabs from Heathrow. So say you were reading through the content if you're a user with dementia, and then you may have lost the memory of what you're reading about. Having that image of the taxi at the top can be really useful for remembering, okay, I'm reading about taxis right now. Okay. And then I just want to take a moment to praise the government website. If you want to have a look at this at any point, it's a very good website that shows, you know, all the kind of techniques that I've been talking about today. Hang on one second. Sorry. Summary. So, dementia is increasingly common. Social, economic, and business drivers Issues include poor memory and concentration, so the design process must address navigation, graphic content, and use of language. So hopefully some of the techniques I've shared today, you can apply these to your own apps and websites. Obviously we haven't been able to cover everything in this short amount of time, but these are some small things you can add in that can be very useful for this user group. So, any questions?
Thank you so much, Lily.
All right.
I just want to check everybody. I've seen one or two questions pop up, but
Mhm.
there's plenty of time here now for you to ask questions. I've got one. You've picked mainly examples from, I think, desktop uh,
Yes.
sort of experience.
Go
Is
back.
there anything you can particularly think of around mobile that would make a difference in terms of people using
Mhm.
mobile with memory issues or
Yeah.
any of the other things that we talked about?
Yeah. So you can apply these sort of techniques still to mobile content, say if you've got a responsive website or an app. So I've seen on apps before carousels, so including a pause on that. And yeah, basically, like the pause hide functionality, these sort of techniques, WCAG in general is the same. You can apply this to desktop and mobile. So,
And I think for those. I mean, there were some people who weren't familiar with WCAG. I think it's important
mhm.
to underline again. I mean, you did a sort of a whistle stop there of a number of different individual items, but for anybody familiar with WCAG, I think you would have realised that the connection is, hang on a minute, this is stuff I possibly already know. I just haven't thought about
Yeah.
this in dementia. And
Mm.
somebody's asked whether you were going to talk about ARIA. I don't know whether that is something you were intending. You
Not
could.
in this case, no, because that's more, ARIA's more for screen reader users and for making components on a website accessible for that user group.
Could you
So
just?
this is more about,
I'm not familiar with that ARIA, so I just wondered if you could explain that
okay,
really.
so ARIA is essentially snippets of code you can add into existing code that allow components to be fully accessible for screen readers. So a simple example is if you have an accordion, that's when you have like a link on a page, and if you click it, it opens more. So you can apply an ARIA attribute to that so that a screen reader will say if it's open or closed, basically. That's kind of a vague summary of what ARIA is.
Okay, great, thank you. Got a couple of interesting questions here. The
Mhm.
first one is actually a helpful comment. Matthew Moores has said there's good help regarding this at the Dementia Action Alliance website. We'll mention that in the notes about the event afterwards, but
Yeah,
that's really helpful. If anybody on the webinar has any other top tips, please drop them into the questions box for us. It's always
absolutely.
where people are getting this sort of advice from. Um, there's a question. This is quite a generic one, I guess, for us.
Mhm.
How much extra does it cost to keep these factors in mind, particularly with websites? And then there's a related question from the same person, Reno, saying,
Mhm.
do the dementia-specific requirements clash with other accessibility requirements? I mean, I know from AbilityNet's point of view,
Mhm.
that adding accessibility into your project, we always recommend should be done from the start because it's actually more
Yeah.
expensive to solve afterwards. So in terms
Mhm.
of cost, we're encouraging designers to include it from the beginning because of the costs of not doing it, just as much as the cost of including it. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of what you described there presumably could be included in any project at any time as long as you've thought of it from the start.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So if you're a UX designer, say, thinking about including a pause button or in a carousel or breadcrumb links, if you implement that from the start, like Mark was saying, then it shouldn't cost any extra. It should be part of the design.
And then it does crop up, I think, when there are questions about the preferences in thinking about one particular set of users and how that may affect.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, you're doing this day to day. I mean, how often does something like that come up where you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, if I do that for that group, then that's not necessarily going to work well for that group.
Mhm. It's an interesting question. I think with this user group in particular, as a lot of the kind of good practice examples that I've shared are to do about navigation and orientation that will actually help all users regardless of disability, which is great actually when being mindful about dementia, I think. But as a whole, no, usually actually, even, making sure things have good color contrast for people with dementia, that will help people with visual impairment as well. That will help actually everyone because there's always going to be a time in everyone's life now where you'll be viewing your smartphone in sunlight. So if the website has good color contrast, chances are you'll be able to read that a lot easier, and that's for someone who has full sight. So,
Cool. And actually, I've got an example here. James has said about an accordion that it's
mm,
good steps in a form, but is it less good for other access needs? For example, having separate pages. Are there reasons why an accordion may not work for someone that you can think of, or are you advocating that as an approach to sort of more complex forms as a basic?
Yeah, I think using the concept of having forms on one page is much better than across several pages for users with dementia. And then you would have to be mindful of, kind of I touched on it a second ago, about making sure those accordions are accessible for screen reader users also. So applying the applicable area to the accordion.
We've done a webinar about forms. I think we'll be doing it again. It's a couple of years we did it. It's one of our most popular recordings. And I do remember that one of the underlying principles anyway is to make your forms as simple as possible, rather than to try and make a very complicated form into something accessible, is actually to try your forms. And I guess the same thing applies here, and in some senses the simpler the form is, the better designed the actual information gathering process is, then the easier it is to implement for any user. I've got another great tip here, which is the BBC Mobile Accessibility Guidelines.
Yeah, they're really good.
They're really good, yeah. I mean, I was talking to somebody about those the other day, and they're saying about how much more usable they are than the WCAG guidelines.
They are, yes, they really are. WCAG is great, but you really have to kind of sit down and focus to understand them, because it is quite a lot of technical language. So BBC is a good place to go.
And again, we'll include a link in that to the notes that go out further. There's a very specific question here from someone saying, does larger text make it more accessible for people with dementia? Is there any reason why that would be particularly relevant?
It would be relevant because of, you know, a lot of people, not all, but quite often with people in the older generation, eyesight can deteriorate. So if your default font size is quite large, then that's going to be amazing, you know? So, yes.
So, yeah. And also, I guess the other thing is for enabling people to change the font size, to make it easier on the website, people to have the controls that they need, either on page or simply that most browsers will allow that now anyway. Yeah,
so ensuring that it's responsive to increase in text size is great. And that's a WCAG point as well. So
actually, the phone seems to be, to me, I think that works less well on a phone. I think that's harder for people to implement the responsive designs. Generally not full, and the text gets really big too quickly. The letters start running to each other. I think that's
it's common to see things overlap quite a lot when you do increasing text on a mobile. So that could be something, a webinar in the future.
I don't know whether you know the answer to this, Lily. I haven't done enough research, but you mentioned symptoms of dementia. Do these vary between different types of dementia, for example, vascular or Alzheimer's? And if so, would one improvement hinder the experience for another dementia sufferer? I don't know whether you picked that up in your research.
Well, every single individual with dementia will have different symptoms, so they'll be affected very differently. But the good practice examples I've shared and we've discussed today will help all of them in different ways, but they wouldn't hinder them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think again, the underlying principle is that we're talking here about good practice. Using the Gov UK site as a starting point, they've got well-documented practices as well about how they build their sites and make them accessible. There's some really useful accessibility links within the .gov site. There's an accessibility blog that somebody runs from within the team, the government digital service. And it's no coincidence that pulling those examples up that they work well in this particular example, dementia, because they probably work across the board in a similar way. So they're useful to look at in terms of best practice, I think. Okay, one point here, somebody's asked about breadcrumb links. Our breadcrumb links are common on sites. As somebody's not seen this before, Christella, but my take on it is that breadcrumbs are one of those things that designers like to drop off because they make it look a bit messy. When they're doing the design from a graphic point of view, very often talking to people at an initial design phase and saying, well, where's the breadcrumb? I said, oh, we didn't think we needed one on this one. Do you have that with your clients you're working with day to day? Is that?
I've actually seen breadcrumb links on pages more than not, surprisingly. So, but definitely including them is very useful, but like you say, sometimes designers decide not to, but I think they should always be included to help all users, you know.
Well, I think it is a basic of WCAG, isn't it, that it's required, and it's
Yeah,
very simple. It's an easy way of passing the test instead of failing it.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, keep the breadcrumbs, Matthew. Definitely. Do you have? Are you aware? Are we aware of any research evidence that demonstrates these design guidelines actually do help this particular user group? I don't know whether you made any connections with anybody in particular to show the connection into dementia users, and whether there's any research.
There's
I didn't.
been quite a lot of research done by the W3C about this topic, about web accessibility for cognitive impairment, because that was actually one of the things that interested me most about this topic, is that a lot of web accessibility focuses on visual impairment and not enough on cognitive. So maybe I can send you the link to that research and we can share that out. And it's a long kind of, loads of case studies are involved in it as well. It's really good, that. And it mentions a lot about memory, attention span, and so on.
Great, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and it sounds like a good topic for a blog post as well on our site. That's the sort of thing we'll be able to share it through that. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Somebody's just asked about sign up for the next webinars, about the forms webinar. That was file that one under a nice idea. It hasn't got a date yet.
Yeah.
But we have got one coming up, which is on the 30th of March, which is about accessible carousels. As you mentioned about the pause button, there are plenty of things, a good carousel that can make it much more accessible than one that isn't. We also have a whole series of webinars recorded on our website, which you can see at abilitynet.org.uk/webinars, and that how to build a forms webinar is in there somewhere. And so are the slides. So all of the slides from our webinars are posted onto slideshare.net/AbilityNet. So for anybody looking for that type of information, that's one place you can look for it, through the webinars links or on SlideShare. So thank you so much, Lily. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody else. If you want to know more about what we do in terms of our accessibility services and having people like Lily help you with your website projects, please visit our site and request a quote. So when you go into that process, somebody from the sales team will talk to you about your needs and sort of get to the bottom of how we can help you. We also, as I said, have a helpline, 0800 269 545. That's particularly useful, I think, in this context for anybody who's supporting someone with dementia, thinking about technology and what sort of adaptations may help them, rather than necessarily the design of the websites. Much more practical stuff. We help people every day with all sorts of practical support to adapt their computer or make the choice of the right technology for them to suit the particular conditions or impairments. So 0800 269 545 is our helpline number, so call that anytime if you have any questions. So, as I say, thank you very much, Lee, and thank you, everyone. This is the end of the show. We're going to record this, and the recording will be available probably about a week's time by the time we've added all the captions and so on. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.